Hello and welcome to IELTS online classes with Banke. I trust you are staying safe and you are doing wonderfully well. So today in a series of lessons we started on the IELTS online classes with Banke, I am going to be sharing with you the lesson 2 in the series. In the past lesson, I taught you how to identify I taught you how to get a band 7+, okay? And it's important that you know what is expected from you by the examiner so that you can prepare appropriately too, okay? So today, you are going to learn how to write according to the question. This video lesson is designed specifically to answer questions I got from one of you who asked, how can I write according to the question? So once you already know what the examiners are looking out for in your write-up in terms of the band descriptors and how you can ensure that you satisfy all the criteria. And now you have the question at hand. How do you write according to the question? In another way to ask that question is, how will I write in such a way that I don't veer off points? That's another way of asking that particular question. I don't want to veer off points. I don't want to write outside the scope of what the question is asking me to do, okay? So here are the steps I think you can take. There are 3 steps. Number 1, analyze the question, all right? When you analyze the question correctly, that way you can provide the correct answers. Remember I said analyze the question correctly. That means if you don't analyze the question correctly, you are going to get it wrong from the outset and you're going to write outside the question. But if you understand the question because you have analyzed it correctly using the FRSC code, which I'll be talking about much later, then you'll be able to write according to what is requested in the question. The next thing will be to create the appropriate structure. Create the appropriate structure for your letter. And lastly, come up with ideas. So moving on quickly, let's start with the first one, and that is to analyze the question correctly so that you can provide the correct answers. How do you analyze the question correctly? The first step is to use the FRSC code. Now, in Nigeria, there is the FRSC people. They are the Federal Road Safety Corps in charge of ensuring that our roads are safe, and that the road network is safe for users. But this FRSC code is not that one. This FRSC code means a 4-step method to correctly analyze the question. So the first step you want to take when you want to analyze the question correctly is to identify the form of letter you're writing. There are generally 3 forms or types of letters that you'll be writing. Again, this series, we are starting with the general training, then subsequently we'll look at the academic training. But you know, this for the general training of the IELTS, you are going to be writing a letter in task 1 of the writing module and an essay in task 2. So you want to identify the form of letter you're going to be writing. And the question will not state it that you are writing this particular type of letter. The onus is on you to identify the type of letter you are going to be writing. And generally, there are 3 types of letters, namely formal, informal, and semi-formal letters. These are the 3 types of letters you are going to be writing in the IELTS examination. The next thing will be to identify who the imaginary recipient will be. Now, the recipient is either known or unknown. And I say imaginary recipient because if you have identified the letter to be a formal type of letter, and you address the recipient in such a way that it is telling the examiner that you are addressing it to a letter that is written to an informal styled letter, then you are going to miss marks there. So what this basically means is that for the formal and the semi-formal letter, for the formal and the semi-formal types of letters, the recipients are taken as unknown. Although in the semi-formal letter, the recipient is known to an extent. In the formal letter, the recipient is not known at all. But then for the semi-formal letter, the recipient is taken as unknown because the recipient is just known to an extent, but not completely known to you, the writer of the letter. So the recipient is either known or unknown. Largely, all informal letters are written to known recipients. The next step is to identify the style. What style will you be using? In the formal type of letter, the style is usually a serious style. And for the informal letter, it's a cordial, casual style that connotes that the recipient is known. And so there are some words that will not be acceptable in the formal letter, but you can use them in the informal letter. For instance, you cannot use contractions like can't or won't. You can't use that in a formal letter because when you use contractions like can't instead of writing can not or won't instead of would not in full, it shows the examiner that you are using an informal style when in essence the question is a formal letter that should take the formal style when you write the letter. Do you understand that? So your style is going to be either casual or cordial for an informal letter. For an informal letter, it's casual or cordial. Remember that the recipient in an informal letter is known. And for a formal letter, the style is usually serious. And for a semi-formal letter, it's what I call semi-serious. It's in between the formal and the informal style. Remember that the recipient is still taken as unknown, even though you know the recipient to an extent, but it's still not sufficient to categorize the imaginary recipient as known to you. Okay. C stands for content keywords. We are talking about how to analyze a question correctly, right? And this 4-step process will help you to analyze the question correctly from the formal, the for or type, to the recipient, to the style, to the content keywords that you should be using. So what are the content keywords? The content keywords are words that you will see in the question that will help you to come up with the right ideas on what to write in your body of the letter. Remember that the letter will have the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. I mean, it's the essay that has conclusion, but for your letter, you probably have just a last line paragraph and the closing. We'll talk more on that in the structure of your letter as we go on. So the content keywords, usually you will see things like explain, suggest, complain, describe. When you are to explain something, that's a powerful content keyword. The way you will explain a scenario or an event is different from just saying. And if you see content keywords like suggest in the question, it tells you to develop extra details for the particular content you want to write in response to the question. So these content keywords are very powerful. And when you are supposed to be complaining, if the question says complain and you are explaining, you're already telling the examiner that you don't understand the question, you've not analyzed it correctly. Description is also different from when you suggest. And so these are specific content keywords that will help you to be able to write within the scope of what is asked in the question. You will not write off points. Also, note that sometimes you may not even have the words, these content keywords exactly. You may see something like say how, tell why. These are phrases that are also in a way telling, for instance, if the question says in the bullet point, say how, that means you are to explain, but you may not see explain word for word. You may just say how or this give details. Give details is something that is tending towards description. Okay, so these are ways that these content keywords can be changed, but they will still mean the same thing. So that's that on how to analyze the question correctly using the FRSC code. Now let's look at this question to bring home the point further. You went on a sightseeing tour, but you did not enjoy it, and you would love to complain. Write a letter to the manager of the tour company. In your letter, tell him why you chose the tour, what you did not enjoy, and suggest improvements. You can see the content keyword there, suggest. Tell him why. Say what. These are content keywords that helps you to come up with content within the question, and you will not be writing outside the question. So now, here's another one. Your friend has agreed to look after your house while you are on holiday. Write a letter to your friend. In your letter, remind your friend about the travel dates. Describe, can you see that content keyword there? Describe where the house key is. Give details. Give details about household duties you need your friend to handle. Let's look at the final question. You have a problem with your neighbor. Write a letter to your neighbor. In your letter, describe the problem. Say how long it has been a problem. Explain what action you want the neighbor to take. See? So what's the next step after you have correctly analyzed the question? So the three questions that I just posted, this is question one. Let's go back to question one. Question one, what type of form of letter is this? Question two, what form or type of letter is this? Question 3. What form of letter is this? So identify the form of letter it is and take your paper and write it down. The next step will be to create the appropriate structure for your letter. Once you have identified the form of letter you're writing, you will also need to create the appropriate structure. By structure, we mean that the letter must have an opening, and the opening is how you complete the dear part. The opening is how you complete the dear part. You will not need to write any addresses, and you do not need to write any caption in the case of a formal letter. If I identify the letter as a formal letter, you don't need to write a caption over it as it is obtained in the regular English language. So you need to complete the dear parts. So depending on the form of letter you are writing, the type of letter, whether you are writing a formal letter, an informal letter, or a semi-formal letter, how you will complete these dear parts differs depending on the form of letter. So if you are writing a formal letter, the dear part would be something like dear sir or madam. You would see in the question can even tell you to begin with dear sir or madam. If you see the dear sir or madam in the question, if the question says begin with dear sir or madam, that is a cue to tell you that you are writing a formal letter. So that's the opening part. Then you're going to have the introduction. You're going to have the introduction. Then I always advise my students to dedicate a paragraph each to the bullet points. You must not lump up all the bullet points given in the question in a paragraph. You should dedicate a paragraph to each bullet point. Dedicate a paragraph to each bullet point and leave a line, a single line space. That's proper paragraphing that tells the examiner that you show consideration and you are showing consideration for the examiner. So it tells the examiner that your work is properly ordered. So this simple attention to details, they matter a lot, and they also help in your coherence and cohesion so that your work has a seamless flow. Remember that one of the criteria that the examiner will be examining you on will be on coherence and cohesion. And part of coherence and cohesion is your proper paragraphing. So that's why in your introduction, you dedicate a paragraph to the introduction, and do not lump up bullet points. What you should address in paragraphs dedicated to each bullet point, do not lump it up into the introduction. All right, so you have bullet points for paragraph 1, and then you address what is asked in bullet point 2 in paragraph 2, and address the other bullet points in paragraph 3. Then you have the last paragraph, or what I call to action, depending on what the content keyword is saying. If the content keyword is asking you to complain about a particular service that was rendered that you were not pleased about, and then the last bullet point now tells you to say what you want them to do, you are going to say that in the 3rd bullet point paragraph, and you are going to come up with a sentence or two before you write the closing for the letter. So the call to action, if it is just, say, an application letter, for instance, you're just going to write, I look forward to hearing from you at the earliest. Thank you for your kind consideration of my application as I look forward to hearing from you at the earliest, or something like that. But then what you will write in the last paragraph for each letter differs depending on what the question says. So it's not a cast in stone. It's not cast in stone. It just depends on you understanding the question and be able to draw up something that follows sequentially with the last bullet point paragraph. That's bullet point paragraph 3. So you're going to come up with what you write for your last paragraph in that, depending on what the question says, and then you have your closing. So for the closing, depending on the form of letter, if you are writing an informal letter, you can use all the best, you can use lots of love, but you cannot use all the best or lots of love for closing a semi-formal letter or a formal letter. This all the best and lots of love can only be used to close an informal letter. You should see the video on how to open and close all types of letters that examiners approve. You should see that video. I created a video on that. That explains in details how to close the various types of letters. You use yours faithfully, yours sincerely, and then your name or full name, depending on the form of letter. In that video on the best way to open and close letters that examiners approve, I go into details, but that's not what we are talking about here. This is just to let you know that these are the various closing formats that are available. And when you see that video, you'll be able to know which to use for what. For instance, I would always use yours sincerely for a formal letter, or yours faithfully. You can use yours faithfully for a formal letter. You can use yours sincerely. It's acceptable. For a semi-formal letter, to yours faithfully, yours sincerely is permissible, it's acceptable, but definitely not all the best or lots of love. So how do you come up with ideas? This is the final step. After you have analyzed the question correctly, you know the form of letter you're writing, you know the recipients who is receiving your letter, imaginary, remember, it's an imaginary recipient. You know the style. You cannot write a semi-formal styled letter in a formal letter. And similarly, you cannot be writing using a style that is acceptable for informal letter when you are writing a formal letter. So coming up with ideas, what do you do when you want to come up with ideas? So you use the content keywords from the question. That's what you basically use to come up with ideas, okay? And let's take a look at question 1 again. You went on a sightseeing tour, but you did not enjoy it, and you would love to complain. Write a letter to the manager of the tour company. In your letter, tell him why. Why did you choose the company? What you did not enjoy, suggest improvements. You know, you can ask yourself why. It doesn't matter whether you've been to sightseeing at a particular, whether you've been on a sightseeing tour in real life or not. You're just going to come up with something to answer the question, okay? And you don't have to have experienced it. You may have seen it in a movie, or you may have read about it somewhere. As long as it answers the question, the ideas are valid. So you want to say, okay, why did you choose the tour? I asked a number of my students to write a letter on this question, and different students had different ideas. So you cannot get stuck on ideas when you know these content keywords and what they want you to do. Just directly answering these questions will help you come up with ideas. So what did you not enjoy? There are a number of things that you may not enjoy on a sightseeing tour. So you see, it's that easy to come up with ideas. And you see, You are talking about what you did not enjoy. You cannot be talking about why you enjoyed it. For instance, I just came up with that randomly. Can't be saying why you enjoyed it when the question actually said what you did not enjoy. So if you are writing what you enjoyed, you see, you are writing outside the question. The question says what you did not enjoy. So you want to ensure that you clearly understand the question and you are giving the response based on what the question asks. So and then the question also says suggest improvements. Suggest improvements, that's another, you can come up with ideas on your recommendations or things you think the company should work on to improve on their services. If the question says suggest improvements and you are writing about, say, you are giving advice, well, that's still part of suggesting improvements. But you are writing something about what's now? The question says suggest improvements. So simply suggest improvements and don't do anything else, right? Okay, so let's move on to this question. Your friend has agreed to look after your house while you are on holiday. Write a letter to your friend. In your letter, remind your friend about the travel dates. Remind your friend about the travel dates. You want to ensure that those things that are stated in the question are addressed. Remind your friend about the travel dates. So you know that you are going to have some travel dates that you will come up with and include in that letter. If you do not put the travel dates in the letter, you know that you have not answered the question. You may write so much, but you may not really answer the question. So these bullet points and what you have in the background story, this is what I call the background story, this that precedes the bullet points. These from here, you can come up with content for your introduction. We'll discuss that in the next, we'll discuss that in subsequent lessons, how to write the various introduction, how to write introductory paragraphs, how to write the bullet point paragraphs, and we'll discuss that further down. But the goal of this lesson is for you to be able to know how to come up with ideas in response to the question, so that you will not be writing outside the scope of what the question is asking you to do. So it's quite simple and straightforward. If the question says remind your friend about the travel dates, then that is what you should be doing. You shouldn't be doing anything else. And says describe where the house key is. Okay. And then you have to give details about household duties you need your friend to handle. When you are giving details about something, it's different from just summarizing something or just saying it briefly. You want to give details. You want to invent extra details that are close to reality, something that is relatable and realistic. So similarly, for this particular question, you have a problem with your neighbor, write a letter to your neighbor. In your letter, describe the problem. You see, that way you can come up, you can just remember, every one of us has at one point in time or the other had neighbors in different places, whether school or work or where you live. Okay, so you can come up with scenarios to help you create content ideas for that particular bullet point. You are to describe the problem. And again, remember that you must write in such a way that it flows and it's easy to read by the examiner, putting into place proper paragraphing as I explained earlier. Say how long it has been a problem. These are content keywords that tells you how to come up with ideas that will help you to write within the question so that you're not writing outside the question. You have to also explain what action, explain, see that content keyword there. explain. You see, explain, explain. When you are explaining something to someone, you of course know what you would say, how you would explain, compared to when you're giving an instruction, compared to when you are asking a question, or when you are describing the problem. So these things will help you not to go outside. So in summary, how do you not write outside the question? What do you do to write within the scope of what the question asks you to do? The number one thing to do is to determine the type of letter to use, to write using the FRSC code. You also structure the letter appropriately. I talked about the structure, and that structure goes for the various types of letters. Then use content keywords to write within the scope of question asked. And so I want to rest my case here today. I hope that you have learned something to help you to write within scope, within the question. And I want you to subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell so that you'll be the first to know when I release new videos. And I'll see you in the next lesson. Till then, I want you to stay safe and have a beautiful day ahead. Cheerios. Bye for now.